Okay, good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. Turn this down just a little bit. Very good. So it is so nice to have you back in our classroom, in our lecture hall, after a 1.5-year hiatus. Who would have imagined? None of us before this pandemic would have imagined that we would have such an interruption to all of our lives. The pandemic, as you know well, is not over, but it is ramping down. Thank you all for wearing masks. I won't wear a mask while I'm teaching. It's important that all of you wear masks. What we're doing is trying to ensure that you are as safe here as you are at home. So at home is the most safe place. Except even at home, you're not perfectly safe. People are coming and going. So there's some small chance of infection. I would say that with the precautions we're taking here, you're about as safe here as you are at home. So we're requiring everyone to be vaccinated. We have other rules. You've all seen the announcements. So I think you are, tell me? Starting the recording. Yeah, it's up to you. You can skip this. Video recording is running. In fact, I should show all of our friends. There you go. You can't see this, but our friends who are watching this recording are seeing a picture of the hall. So that you can wave. That's very nice. So they can see all of you seated here. Before the pandemic, we had many more coming, but I'm pleased to see all of you coming. Okay, let me put this back. I have to get used to all these buttons. Very good. So we've taken all proper precautions. One precaution you may not know is we're running the room's ventilation system constantly so that the air around you doesn't become stagnant. It's constantly being lifted up and away from you. So I think you're about as safe here as you are at home. And then as the pandemic eventually winds down, it'll take some more time, then all of our rules will gradually relax those rules as we can. But your health and safety are absolutely foremost. Okay, and just to finish my comments here, we are in the process of a gradual reopening. You know that our Sunday satsang sessions have already resumed. We'll meet tomorrow at 5 p.m. Then over a period of time, we'll reintroduce other programs that we've had here. We'll be reintroducing the Tuesday evening Vedanta class. We'll be reintroducing Sanskrit class. We'll be reintroducing the meditation session. So gradually over the next period of weeks or months. Okay, you can begin recording and we can begin our class. Picking up the thread, you know, I hope many of you have been watching these classes online. So we started, I think, at the first of the year. We started our Bhagavad Gita classes online, starting with Chapter 1. And if you've missed any classes, it's all available either on YouTube or on our website. And we'll pick up the thread today, resuming with, and we begin always with some recitation. We'll begin that recitation with verse 33. Verse 33. There we go. Okay. And as always, a glance at the meaning and then repeat after me. Shreyan dravyamayad yagnad, Shreyan dravyamayad yagnad, Jnana yajna parantapa, Jnana yajna parantapa, Sarvam karma kilam partha, Sarvam karma kilam partha, Jnane parisamapyate, Jnane parisamapyate, tadvidhi pranipatena, tadvidhi pranipate, pariprashnena sevaya, pariprashnena sevaya, upadekshanti te jnanam, upadekshanti te jnanam, jnaninas tattvadarshinaha, jnaninas tattvadarshinaha, yajñātva napunar moham, yajñātva napunar moham, evam yasyasi pandava, evam yasyasi pandava, yena bhutanya sheshani, yena bhutanya sheshani, drakshasyatman yato mayi, drakshasyatman yato mayi, api chedasi papebhyaha, api chedasi pape, sarvebhyah papakritamaha, sarvebhyah papakritamaha, sarvam jnana, sarvam jnana plava, sarvam jnana plavenaiva, sarvam jnana plavenaiva, vrajinam santarishyasi, vrajinam santarishyasi, yathaidhansi samidhognir, yathaidhansi samidhognir, bhasmasat kuruterjuna, bhasmasat kuruterjuna, jnanagnis sarva karmani, jnanagnis sarva karmani, bhasmasat kurute tata, bhasmasat kurute tata, nahi jnanena sadrisham, nahi jnanena sadrisham, pavitramiha vidyate, pavitramiha vidyate, tat swayam yoga samsiddhaha, tat swayam yoga samsiddhaha, kalenatmani vindati, kalenatmani vindati, shraddhavan labhate jnanam, shraddhavan labhate jnanam, tatparasam yatendriyaha, tatparasam yatendriyaha, jnanam labdhva param shantim, jnanam labdhva param shantim, achirenadhigacchati, achirenadhigacchati. Very good. We'll conclude our recitation there and pick up the thread. We begin with verse 36 today. Yes. And let me just set the context for you. The middle part of this chapter, for the last several classes, we've been seeing Sri Krishna's unfoldment of a particular aspect of karma yoga, a particular aspect in which you adopt an attitude of sacrifice, sacrificial offering towards your deeds. We went on for about a dozen verses. And we won't return to all of that, but the idea is just as you make sacrificial offerings into a sacred fire, here you sacrifice your deeds to Ishvara. And as I explained at some length, sacrificing your deeds means instead of doing what you want, instead of being driven by raga and dvesha, Instead, you choose to follow Dharma. And by following Dharma, you sacrifice your agenda, so to speak, your selfish agenda, and instead act to fulfill Dharma. And we've seen that section quite elaborately. And then that section ended with this verse, Shreyan Shreyan Dravya Mayat Yagnat Jnana Yajnaha, where Sri Krishna concludes that long section on yajna is the word for sacrifice, Sanskrit word for sacrifice, yajna. And you see the term yajna coming twice in the first half. So Dravya Mayat Yagnat Shreyan, better than a yajna ritual in which you offer dravya, different objects. He says, better than that yajna is jnana yajna, an offering of knowledge. An offering of knowledge here means using these teachings of Sri Krishna, the teachings of Vedanta in general, to, in one sense, to come closer to Ishvara from a devotional standpoint. Knowledge brings intimacy. And I need to explain that just a little bit. So this shift from karma to jnana is taking place in this chapter. And the shift takes place because of the importance of jnana. The whole jnana here means spiritual wisdom. Spiritual wisdom means knowledge of reality, the reality of you, the reality of the universe, the reality of Ishvara. And from the standpoint of bhakti, from the standpoint of devotion, knowledge leads to bhakti. Knowledge leads to intimacy with Ishvara. And some of you will remember the story I've told to explain this. Some of you, when you got married, you barely knew your spouse. That may or may not be your individual case, but that's not uncommon in traditional Hindu culture. So you got married, you barely knew your spouse. And how much intimacy did you feel with your spouse in those days? Very little. You didn't know the person. But then over a period of months and years, as your knowledge, and it is knowledge, as your knowledge of your spouse increased, your sense of intimacy with your spouse grew. Apply that to Ishvara. If we have no idea whom we're praying to, what kind of intimacy is that? So you can see why this shift from karma yoga to knowledge takes place at the last portion of this verse, because karma yoga is crucial, but this knowledge is the goal. And this knowledge at two levels. I've just described it at a devotional level, knowledge of Ishvara leading to more intimacy with Ishvara. But really speaking, the focus of Sri Krishna in the last portion of this chapter is not knowledge of Ishvara, but knowledge of your true self. So jnana yajna here means to gain knowledge of your true self, atma jnana, self-knowledge, that spiritual wisdom, and the very next verse will give one of several reasons why that spiritual knowledge is so important. And instead of explaining it, I'll let Sri Krishna explain it with verse 36, where we pick up the thread. Api chedasi papebhyaha, api chedapi papebhyaha, sarvebhya papakritamaha, sarvebhya papakritamaha, sarvam jnanaplavenaiva, sarvam jnanaplavenai, vrajinam santarishyasi, vrajinam santarishyasi. We'll see the verse briefly, and then there's quite a bit to understand here. api chet, even if you are, even if you are, drop down a line, papakrit tamaha. Papa, you know, is sin. Papakrit, one who is sinful, one who commits sin. Papakrit tamaha, that tama affix means most. Even if you are not just papakrit, not just a sinner, papakrit tamaha, the superlative sinner, literally. And he says further, sarvebhyaha, compared to all, papebhyaha, and there's a typo there, compared to all sinners, in comparison to sarvebhyaha, papebhyaha, in comparison to all who commit sin, suppose you are the worst among them all. He says, apichet, even if that were the case, in the last half, sarvam, connected to vrijinam, all sin, santarishyasi, you will cross. You will cross over all sin, even though you're the worst of sinners, you will cross over all sin. How? Jnana plavena eva. Jnana plava means boat. By the boat of knowledge, it's a metaphor. Don't think of it literally. So the idea of crossing over the sea is the metaphor used here. So like you cross over the sea in a boat, here you cross over an ocean of sinfulness by means of knowledge. Now, here we're seeing why Sri Krishna makes this shift at the end of chapter 4, a shift from karma yoga to jnana, spiritual wisdom. And here is one of several reasons why the emphasis has shifted here. And that is to come out of sinful behavior. Sinful means adharmic. The word sin is a little problematic. It's kind of a Christian word. A better word is papa. Papa means anything that goes against dharma. And the best way of understanding that which goes against dharma, a primary definition of dharma is ahimso paramo dharma. The highest expression of dharma is non-harming. So therefore, contrary-wise, adharma, in a most simple form, is causing harm. Causing harm in any situation, causing harm to other people, obviously, causing harm to animals, which is why there's a value for vegetarian diet. It's not that vegetables are holy or sacred, but you avoid killing animals, not causing harm to nature, not abusing our environment. So here, the word the vrijinam, which is usually translated as sin, we're talking about any harmful behavior. Now, what I find very interesting is that this harmful behavior in most other religious traditions, especially the religious traditions based on the Bible, they'll call that harmful, quote, sinful behavior, they call it evil. And evil is a very problematic word. It's very central in the biblical traditions, but it's very inappropriate in the Hindu tradition. And there's a reason for that. Remember that in the biblical tradition, they envision evil as an existent thing, an existent force, and they even personify it as Satan, shaitan, you might say. So, is that in the Hindu tradition, have you ever heard of the power of evil? Evil Shakti? The point I'm making is that the concept of evil as understood in the biblical traditions, that concept is completely foreign to the Hindu tradition. And the best way of seeing that, there's actually a wonderful quotation of Swami Vivekananda, who famously said, "In the world, there is no such thing as evil except for ignorance." And what he meant by that is ignorance is at the root of all harmful behavior. I'll say that again. Ignorance is at the root of all harmful behavior, not a force of evil, as it's believed in the biblical traditions, but ignorance. Swami Vivekananda said it so beautifully. To understand how ignorance is at the root of harmful behavior, we have to return to a topic that we've seen quite extensively in chapters 2, 3, and 4. And that topic is how conventional behavior is driven by raga and dvesha. Raga is being compelled to chase after what you want. Dvesha is being compelled to run away from what you don't want. And these compulsions is what lead us to commit acts of adharma, so-called sinful actions, harmful actions. So if you are, the very word compulsion, and I think that's important to connect that word compulsion to raga dvesha. Too often, raga dvesha is just translated as likes and dislikes. That's really to use an American expression, that's a totally lame translation to say raga dvesha is likes and dislikes. So you've all heard it said that an enlightened person is free from raga dvesha. Well, my guru, Puja Swami Dayananda, he liked coffee. He also liked South Indian food. He was raised in a village in Tamil Nadu. And he had some, I don't know what he disliked. I don't know, must have been some foods or other things that he disliked. If Puja Swami Dayananda had likes and dislikes, does it mean he's not enlightened? Now you get my point. The word like and dislike is not a proper translation for raga dvesha. He was free from raga dvesha, free from these compulsions to chase after what you want, to run away from what you don't want. And it's that compulsivity that leads to harmful behavior. Because as you are chasing after what you don't want, you trample other people in your way. Right? As you are running away from what you don't want, if there's someone who is an obstacle, you trample over that person. You get rid of that person. The point I'm making is this compulsivity of raga dvesha causes us to do things contrary to our values. We have a value for following dharma. We have a value for not harming others. Yet, when we are compelled by raga dvesha, we end up hurting others. We end up committing acts of adharma. So raga and dvesha, this compulsivity, is fundamental to all harmful behavior, all so-called sinful behavior, all behavior that the biblical tradition calls evil. So all, and according to Swami Vivekananda, not just him, everyone who understands these teachings, the root cause for all behavior that we label as evil, the root cause is, we'll start with raga dvesha, but now we take another step. So notice that Vivekananda Swami did not say raga dvesha, he said ignorance. But most of you can make the connection, because why are you compelled by raga dvesha? Where does that compulsivity come from? And to show a counterexample, suppose you discovered your true nature to be Satchidananda Atma, completely full, infinite, vast, sacred, divine. Suppose you discovered your true nature to be the true source of all peace and contentment. Having made that discovery, you would feel perfect peace and complete contentment. With that knowledge, what could compel you to commit an act of adharma? You see the point? If you were enlightened, if you discovered this ultimate source of peace and contentment within you, if you felt utterly peaceful and content, nothing at all could compel you to hurt another, to commit an act of adharma, a sinful act. So if knowledge removes the compulsivity of raga dvesha, that shows that ignorance lies at the root. Remember, knowledge removes ignorance. Just to make an obvious point here, knowledge doesn't remove raga dvesha. Knowledge removes ignorance, correct? Knowledge removes ignorance. Ignorance of your true self is the root cause for all harmful behavior. That's exactly what Swami Vivekananda meant when he said there is no evil but ignorance. And he meant ignorance not in general, he meant ignorance in a spiritual sense, ignorance of your true divine nature. That particular ignorance is the root cause of all harmful behavior. With knowledge removing that particular ignorance, sinful behavior comes to an end. Papa krittamaha api chet. Even if you are the worst sinner in the world. Let me give a ridiculous example. So in modern history, if you want an example of evil, an example that's often given is during World War II, the behavior of Adolf Hitler. And it was just so insanely despicable. I mean, to bring about the death of 6 million Jews and probably, I think, 20 million, I don't even remember the number, on the battlefield. Anyway, he caused horrible, horrible harm on such a vast scale. If you want to use that Christian word evil, there's a good place to use it. Now, just imagine, this is absolutely absurd, imagine an enlightened Adolf Hitler. Imagine someone who, instead of commanding armies, someone who sat at an altar, closing his eyes, absorbed in meditation, appreciating the fullness and completeness that is his true nature. Could an enlightened Adolf Hitler commit those horrible acts? I know this is absurd, but it makes the point. And the point is that this ignorance of one's true nature is absolutely sufficient to cause people to commit the most heinous, most terrible of deeds, as he did. And that's why Sri Krishna concludes here, Sarvam vrajinam, all sin, santarishyasi, you will cross over that ocean of sin. No matter how sinful you are, you will cross over that ocean of sin, jnana plavena eva, in that boat of knowledge, because, be very clear here, knowledge addresses the root cause. And we'll talk more about that. Knowledge addresses in fact, we'll see that, I think, in the very next verse. 2 more verses. I'll hold off on that. Knowledge addressing the root cause. Let's proceed. Yathaidhansi samidhognir, yathaidhansi samidhognir, bhasmasat kuruterjuna, bhasmasat kuruterjuna, jnanagna sarva karmani, jnanagna sarva karmani, bhasmasat kurute tata, bhasmasat kurute tata. So he gives another metaphor. The prior metaphor is knowledge like a boat will take you over an ocean of sin. Here he uses knowledge. The metaphor he uses is Agni, fire. We said knowledge removes ignorance. So now we can introduce another metaphor. The fire of knowledge removes the darkness of ignorance. Right? We've used this metaphor so many times. The fire of knowledge burns away ignorance. This is a metaphor here. So he says, yata, just as, agnihi, at the end of the first line. Agnihi, which is samidhaha, kindled, shining brightly. Just as that well-kindled fire, what does it do? Second line, bhasmasat kurute. It reduces to ashes, what? In the second word, you have to break the words apart. Yatha edhansi. Just yatha, just as edhansi is a fuel. In fact, it's often used for the fuel, that's the sticks that are offered into a sacrificial fire. Here just means fuel in general. So just as that fuel, just as wood, just as sticks, bhasmasat kurute, are reduced to ashes by that samidhaha agni, by that blazing fire, Arjuna, in the same way, jnanagnihi, nice expression. The fire of spiritual wisdom, jnanagni. That spiritual wisdom, bhasmasat kurute, reduces to ashes, and reduces to ashes is a metaphor, burns away what? Sarva karmani, all deeds, all actions, tata, in the same way. So in what sense does knowledge burn away all actions? And this is subject to lots of misinterpretation. There are many who think that when you become utterly enlightened, all action comes to an end. Of course, if all action comes to an end, what about eating? What about sleeping? Pardon me for saying this. What about going to the bathroom? you know, so sarva karmani cannot possibly mean all actions without exception. So it must mean all, in fact, you can fix it by adding one very simple word. All conventional action comes to an end. That's absolutely correct. And just to put it back into the verse, just as fire reduces wood to ashes, in the same way the fire of knowledge, of spiritual wisdom, destroys all conventional actions, all conventional behavior. That word conventional, some of you know I've used it before. When we've talked about conventional behavior, is that behavior driven by raga and dvesha. That behavior which is driven by these compulsions to get what you want and run away from what you don't want. That conventional behavior is completely, totally removed. Doesn't mean all behavior is removed. It means behavior driven by raga, dvesha is removed. But then we come back to the enlightened person. So going back to my example of Puja Swami Tadatmananda, he liked coffee. When he drank coffee, isn't that an action? It is an action, but it's not an action driven by raga dvesha. Raga means a compulsion. He had no compulsion to get coffee. There are people who are compelled to get coffee. There are people who will drive 5 miles to go to a Starbucks to order their special kind of coffee. That's a compulsion. And then they pay a ridiculous amount of money for that. That's compulsivity. So an enlightened person like Puja Swami Tadatmananda likes coffee, but is free from the compulsivity. In fact, he had a very nice word that he was fond of. He said, an enlightened person is agendaless. That's a very unusual word, but a very meaningful word. What did he mean when he said an enlightened person is agendaless? What is your agenda? Your agenda is to accomplish what you want. Your agenda is to chase after what you want and run away from what you don't want. So agenda is one way of describing raga and dvesha. One who is driven by an agenda is one who is driven by raga dvesha. An enlightened person is agendaless, not driven by raga dvesha. They continue to perform actions, but as Sri Krishna says in this verse, all actions are burnt away by this knowledge, all conventional actions. This also has a second meaning, and it has to do with being reborn. You've all heard it said that an enlightened person is not reborn. Why? So we know, according to the doctrine of karma, is you will be reborn again and again because you have so much sanchita karma. Sanchita karma means the karmas you have accumulated in prior lives, not just this life, but prior lives. How many prior lives have you had? Well, in theory, you could have had an infinite number of prior lives, according to the doctrine of karma. And in an infinite number of prior lives, how much karma have you accumulated? How much sanchita karma has been accumulated in an infinite number of prior lives? And the answer to that question is obvious. You have an infinite amount of accumulated sanchita karma, which will continue to drive you to be reborn again and again for an infinite number of times. How in the world can you break free from the cycle of birth and rebirth? And the answer is only when all of that sanchita karma gets destroyed. And it is said by Sri Krishna, and it is said elsewhere, that this jnanagni, this fire of knowledge, has the capacity to destroy that accumulated sanchita karma. This is a kind of the logic here is a little bit complicated, but the idea is that if karma is the result of ignorance, when you remove I'm going to bore you with 1 minute of pure logic. If you remove the cause, the effect goes away. If you remove, where is that? If you remove the cause for this pot is clay. If you remove the clay, what happens to the pot? This is just pure logic. You remove the cause, the effect goes away. The cause for that infinite amount of sanchita karma, the cause is ignorance. When you remove the ignorance, when you remove the cause, you simultaneously remove that infinite amount of sanchita karma. So there's a second meaning in this verse. Not only are you freed from conventional actions now, You are simultaneous. The fire of knowledge not only burns away conventional behavior by that raga dvesha based behavior, but that fire of wisdom also burns away, as it were, this infinite accumulation of sanchita karma. Okay. Now, this is where I wanted, this is a verse I referred to before, where we see how this knowledge removes the root cause. I'll explain that in this verse. Nahi jnanena sadrisham, nahi jnanena sadrisham, pavitramiha vidyate, pavitramiha vidyate, tat swayam yoga samsiddhaha, tat swayam yoga samsiddhaha, kalenatmani vindati, kalenatmani vindati. The first half might sound a little familiar. It's commonly quoted, nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitramiha vidyate. You may have seen it or heard it associated with Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, our parent organization, who has adopted this as kind of like a, I don't know, what do you call it, a logo or something. Anyway, they use this expression. The meaning here, and the words are all scattered about, so there is na, connect na and vidyate. There is not. There is not. Iha, here in the world, you have to break all these words apart. There is nothing iha, here in the world, that is pavitram, purifying. Sadrisham pavitram, as purifying. There is nothing here in the world as purifying as compared to jnanena, as compared to this spiritual wisdom knowledge. There is nothing as purifying as spiritual wisdom. Now, that sounds wonderful, but what does it mean when we say knowledge is purifying? So far we keep saying knowledge destroys ignorance. Now he's talking about destroying impurities. Well, you've already figured out that in a sense, ignorance is an impurity. And in what sense? Let's discuss this a little bit here. Here, the sense of impurity is that which causes harmful behavior. This is our context. Impurity is used in other contexts as well. But here, what we're discussing is how the impurity called ignorance is the root cause of all harmful behavior. That's our current topic. And Sri Krishna says here, there is nothing as purifying as knowledge. There is nothing that removes, and I'm going to paraphrase now. To say there's nothing as purifying as knowledge is to say there is nothing more effective in removing harmful behavior than spiritual wisdom. This is a paraphrase. There is nothing as effective as spiritual wisdom in removing harmful behavior. Nothing as effective sounds like a commercial when you turn on TV. They say, our product is the most effective. Well, this truly is the most effective. Knowledge, not knowledge in general, spiritual wisdom, atmajnanam, discovery of your true self, your true nature, is the most effective means of removing harmful behavior. And because, as I said before, it removes the root cause instead of removing symptoms. So many times we remove not the root cause, we remove symptoms, and then the problem doesn't go away. I remember decades ago, I had a problem with chronic headaches. And I saw a neurologist, And the neurologist prescribed a medication called a beta blocker. So I started on the medication, and I was delighted the headaches went away immediately. They came back after a month. He doubled the dose. Headaches went away again. Wonderful. And a month later, they came back again. And he actually could double the dose. It was still within the range. He doubled the dose again. So it was very clear that this beta blocker medication was treating the symptom and not the underlying cause for the headaches. By the way, the underlying cause for the headaches, I was very surprised to find out was a lifestyle issue. I used to get regular exercise. That regular exercise came to an end, and the absence of exercise caused stress, and you get the stress in the muscles of your head and neck, and that was the cause of his headaches. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with all of this stuff. The point is that if you fail to address the root cause of the problem keeps coming back. And look at how our society functions. Let's look at how we try to remove the problem of causing harm. The most drastic example of causing harm, I suppose, is killing someone, murder. So what steps has our culture done to remove this horrible problem of murder? So one thing is that there are laws against murder. In fact, laws and a legal system that even has capital punishment in this country. Some people are put to death for committing murder. And this is an attempt to solve the problem of murder. How well does it work? Does the threat of punishment prevent people from murdering? Sometimes, perhaps, but clearly not, because murders continue. Not only so, legal laws that prescribe the punishment of death, those legal laws don't prevent murder. How about religious laws? So, from a biblical standpoint, if you commit murder, you go to hell for all eternity. From a Hindu perspective, if you commit murder, you get reborn as a cockroach. Do these religious teachings solve the problem of murder? Apparently not. How about peer pressure? Societal pressures doesn't seem to do the trick. How about even understanding Dharma? To understand that, as they say in American English, what goes around comes around. So even, by the way, it's interesting to note that many people who follow biblical religions accept certain parts of this doctrine of karma. It was very surprising. Many accept, especially this idea, what goes around comes around. If you do a terrible deed, some way, somehow, you will suffer the consequences of that deed. So many non-Hindus accept this aspect of the doctrine of karma. They accept it completely. So even knowing that, murders continue. So all of these, the laws that are written, the laws created by governments, the laws created by religions, don't completely remove the problem of murder because they don't address the root cause. Societal rules don't address the root cause. And even understanding Dharma doesn't address the root cause. What is the root cause of harmful behavior, as we've discussed several times here? The root cause of that adharmic, so-called sinful behavior is to use Puja Swami Dayananda's word, self-non-recognition. Very carefully chosen expression. He used it frequently. Self-non-recognition, it's a fancy word for ignorance, but it's a word that shows very clearly, not ignorance in general, the failure to appreciate the true source of contentment and peace, being your own innate divine nature. That particular non-recognition, that particular ignorance is the root cause of all harmful behavior. Therefore, that which addresses the root cause of the problem of a dharma is most effective. So you can say it's not just a commercial. When a commercial says our product is better than their product, both products work. You know that. One product may be slightly better, slightly less. But here, we're not talking about slightly better or slightly worse. We're talking about an approach which addresses the root cause. The root cause of all so-called evil is this self-non-recognition, failure to appreciate your own innate divinity. Here's another perspective. When you recognize your innate divinity, you simultaneously recognize the innate divinity of every other person. They come together. You don't have one without the other. So to recognize your own innate divinity is to recognize the innate divinity of all that exists. And if other people that around you, you know them to be manifestations of divinity, how will you hurt them? What could possibly induce you to cause harm? So this is the idea here that nahi jnanena sadrasham pavitramiha. There's nothing as purifying as not a commercial. It's not saying our product is better than others. It is saying that this spiritual wisdom goes to the root cause of the problem. And that root cause, to use Puja Swami Dayananda's words, that root cause is self-non-recognition. Tat, in the second half, tat swayam yoga samsiddhaha. Yoga samsiddhaha. One who is samsiddha, perfected through yoga, perfected through the spiritual teachings, perfected through not just karma yoga, which Sri Krishna has taught so extensively in his chapter, but perfected through this knowledge. What is our current topic? He's shifted from karma yoga to this spiritual wisdom. So when he says yoga samsiddhaha, yoga here means spiritual practice, and here samsiddha, perfected, not just through spiritual practice in general, but in this context, perfected through this spiritual wisdom. This wisdom that makes you recognize your own divinity and simultaneously makes you recognize the innate divinity of every other being. So tat swayam, one who is himself or herself, yoga samsiddhaha, perfected through this spiritual wisdom, vindati, such a person finds, discovers. Tat swayam atmani, making these connections. Tat swayam, one finds itself, and itself referring to this discovery of your true nature, one finds it atmani, within oneself. The truth, we're talking about the value of spiritual wisdom, and the technical term for it is atma jnanam, knowledge of atma, knowledge of your true self. Where will you find that atma jnana? And just to be a little silly, you're not going to find it in a bunch of words, nor are you going to find it in a Swami sitting in front of you and going on and on and on and on about all of this. The only place you're going to find that wisdom is by turning your attention within. Atmani means in yourself. By turning your attention within. Now, that's not to say that the Shastra, scripture, and the Guru are useless, because if you're going to look within, maybe you need some guidance for where to look, how to look, what to watch out for, and how to do that process of self-inquiry. We need help. We need scriptures to guide us. We need gurus to guide us. So it's not that they're useless, but ultimately, you have to discover it for yourself. Leading to a very bold statement, but true. No one can make you enlightened. No scripture can make you enlightened. No guru can make you enlightened. Although I would argue that without scripture and guru, you'll never get enlightened, but that's another topic. No guru or scripture can make you enlightened. You become enlightened. Atmani vindati. When you discover within yourself Atma, your true nature, that innate divinity of who you are. It is discovered within yourself, and it is discovered, Sri Krishna adds a cautionary word here, kalena, over a period of time. And the reason it takes time is we are so deeply ingrained in wrong ways of thinking. And let me be very specific here. From birth onwards, you have been conditioned to think that contentment comes from outside. So starting with an infant, who needs mother. Mother is the source of contentment for that infant. And then that process, the infant looks outside for contentment. That process started at your birth, and that process has continued throughout your whole life. We are deeply conditioned to seek contentment outside. Then along comes a scripture or a Swami who says the true source of contentment is within. When you hear that, does that immediately erase those decades of conditioned thinking where you assume the true source of contentment lies outside? Kalena. It takes time to change the way your mind works. We're talking about nothing less than a transformation of your worldview. A conventional worldview has it that the contentment comes from outside. To replace that conventional worldview with a Vedantic worldview, that the true source of contentment comes from within. To transform worldview is to transform the way you think. To transform the way you think takes time. Kalena. But with time, vindati, you discover. You discover Atmani within yourself, that true source of contentment. We'll conclude here in just a moment. Let me make one point very clear. And that is, the discovery of your true nature doesn't necessarily take time. You just discover. With the help of these teachings, you turn your attention within and you come to understand that your true nature indeed is Satchidananda Atma. Knowledge doesn't take time. How long does it take to understand 2 + 2 is 4? You have to think about it for a while. Knowledge is instantaneous. Discovery of your true nature, and I don't want to go off on a long tangent here at the end of our class, but it's an important point. Knowledge is instantaneous. The discovery of your true nature is instantaneous. It may take time to lead up to the point where you make that discovery, but making that discovery is not gradual. Making that discovery is an insight that takes place in a moment. But an insight can take place in a moment. Changing the way your mind works is not instantaneous. So part of it is instantaneous. The discovery is instantaneous. Gaining knowledge is instantaneous. What is not instantaneous is reshaping the way your mind works, the shifting your worldview, which is why we place a lot of emphasis on Vedantic contemplation. We call it nididhyasana. That nididhyasana, that contemplation, is crucial for changing the way your mind works, for helping you shift your worldview. Okay, this is a good place to conclude. We'll finish our class in just a moment with our short prayers at the altar. Before that, just a couple of quick announcements. So these classes will continue to be uploaded to YouTube for others to watch. It's nice, you should know that there are maybe not even 100 people here, but in the next week, several thousands of people will watch this recording. So there's a large audience of many of students out there in, what do they call it, in the cloud? So some of our students live in New Jersey, other students live in the cloud, so to speak. Anyway, it's nice to have so many students watching these videos. As I said before, our weekly satsang session will be tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. Please join us. At the end, I should give you this advice. At the end of our class, it's advised that we don't congregate, so some social distancing. Again, these rules will ease up hopefully sooner rather than later, but given the current situation, it's advised that we don't congregate, and for that same reason also I will leave the classroom after we're done. Anyway, it is wonderful to have you all back for classes. We'll continue, and I look forward to seeing you each week and look forward to resuming our other classes as well. We'll conclude with our brief prayers. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upmashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utavasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Hamratangamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.